So in this session, we are going to study about functions. We all have seen functions in whichever language we have done programming. For example, in C, we have defined a lot of functions. And important thing to notice about functions in C is their declaration. And we would have seen that the first thing that a function declaration shows is the return value. So it shows whether the function returns an integer or a float or something else. And then there's a function name, and then in the bracket or simple brackets you have actually the arguments. So if I have to calculate area of rectangle with two arguments L and B, let's say both are integers, then the prototype would somewhat look like int area and with two arguments int L comma int B. Now we have to understand that how a function is defined in Python. So before we actually go to the coding part of function to understand its syntax, we have to clearly understand that in Python, we never need to specify the return type or the return value of the function. So we never explicitly say that this function is going to return an integer or this function is going to return a float. Directly, the function definition will start with a keyword called def, and then we have a function name like area, and then we can specify the number of arguments it's going to accept. Again, remembering that in Python there is no concept of data type, so you will of course not say int L comma int B. Rather, what we'll say is L comma B, and then the further thing will be in the coding of that function. So we can go through this slide to understand what I told just now, that we should note that function in Python does not define a return data type. So Python functions do not specify what they're going to return, neither they specify whether they're going to return something or not. In fact, what we should understand is, or how we should view functions in Python, is that every function in Python actually returns a value. So the way to return a value is by using a return keyword. So if you write return something, it will return that value. Or if you completely choose to ignore the return statement, then by default, Python returns Python null object, which is called as none with caps N small o n e. So the null object in Python is referred to as none, and that is anyways returned even if there is no return keyword or the value specified after it. And the third point here, which states, says that you can also specify what your function does in a string, and then someone can query by using a special magic function called under doc under to directly understand what your function is doing. It's like a helper string. Now we'll actually go to do the programming task that we discussed to define a function which will accept two arguments to calculate area of rectangle, which will syntactically make it clear for us how to define and how to call functions in Python. We'll cover both the cases, whether the function returns value or does not return a value. Let's go to the shell for the programming. So as discussed, there is no return value, although we know this function is going to return an integer value for the area of rectangle. We'll simply say def area. Def is the keyword as discussed. It accepts two values, no point and no reason to use int L and int B because there is no concept of data types in Python. Now we can calculate the area as L into B. Now when we want to return something, what we'll do is return, and then we can return the val. So this is how a function is defined. There's a def keyword. There's nothing to specify before def, whether it's going to return integer or return float or going to return anything at all or not. Then there's function name, and then there are arguments. Then this is the code block. Now let's see how to call it. So I can write c is equal to area of 9,8 and print the value. Let's save this as my function.py on my desktop, let's say, and we'll run it. We know 9 into 8 is 72, and let's see how it captures. So this is what it is. So we pass two values 9 and 8. L becomes 9 and B becomes 8 in order, and then it captures the value, returns the sum. So this is how normally a function is defined in Python. And let's try to understand what would have happened if there was no return statement. So if I comment this return statement, save this file and try to run again, what has to be understood now is that since this function does not return anything, then by default it returns the Python null value, which is none. So if I try to capture return value from this function and store it in a variable called C will print the Python null object, which is none. Let's verify our claim. So this is what it shows clearly, that although we calculated the value, but since we did not return anything and we are trying to capture the return value from function, it returns and captures nothing else but Python null, none. We have to study a lot about functions in coming chapters or coming sessions, and we'll go further from there to understand more about variable argument functions in next session and other stuff. So thank you for now.